Welcome to episode 4 of our APUSH for All exam review series. We're now moving on into the modern era of U.S. history, covering the years 1865 to 1919. It's a period of massive change. We've got industrial booms, social reform, and America's arrival on the world stage. In this episode, we're going to focus on industrial capitalism and urbanization, the progressive era, the rise of U.S. imperialism, and America's entrance into World War I. Let's get started with the Gilded Age.
Let's get gilded. We're starting with 1865 today, and chronology
matters.
So 1865 is the end of the Civil War, and after this war that plagued the United States for 4 years, the U.S. really exploded into a new economic age. And this included railroads, factories. There was a new elite class that also emerged because of these advancements through the likes of Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt. And it really happens because of this laissez-faire capitalism where the government was hands-off. These captains of industry or robber barons, whatever you may call them, could rise and create immense amount of wealth through new business tactics like vertical and horizontal integration.
And while some of these aforementioned folks were making it big, beneath the golden surface, what Mark Twain famously called the Gilded Age, lay harsh realities: tenement housing, long factory hours, and child labor. Immigrants poured into cities, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe, facing discrimination and unsafe work. Liberty for the few, poverty for the many, says Henry George in his famous book, Progress and Poverty.
And, this reminds me that earlier in our podcast series, I offered to explain where Samuel Clemens' nom de plume, Mark Twain, came from.
It's true.
And if you remember, Ms. Keltner, you said, no one wants to hear that.
And this time I'm going to say no, period.
Okay. Well, I guess you're going to have to wait until we get back around to Mark Twain for audience members if they ever want to find out.
You know what? We're going to do a whole episode just on Mark Twain.
Okay.
So,
good. Looking forward to it.
Haven't you been the one throughout all these review episodes? Stick to it. We have to get through this. We have to keep these short, Mr. No Fun.
Haven't you done enough, Dr. Garrison?
Responses came in the form of labor. Responses to all of these bad things came in the form of labor unions. You have the Knights of Labor. They're accepting all kinds of people. American Federation of Labor, the AFL, a little more particular about who got to join. But ultimately, it's going to lead to some of the major strikes that will engulf the country, like the Homestead strike, the Pullman strike. And it brought along a lot of reformers who became known as muckrakers, often journalists and writers in general who wanted to expose the corruption. Probably the best example you could pull from is Ida Tarbell writing about Standard Oil, or Jacob Riis taking photographs on how the other half lives, revealing slum life in America's growing cities.
And it was going to take people to reveal all of these inequities, all of these problems within society, so that governments could make change.
The Progressive Era, which was roughly 1890 to 1920, brought political and social reform aimed at fixing Gilded Age problems. The key figures: Theodore Roosevelt, trustbuster, conservationist, square deal; Woodrow Wilson, New Freedom and the Federal Reserve Act; Jane Addams, the Hull House and settlement movement.
And these progressives were really pushing for reforms. Some of these reforms were political, like the initiative, the referendum, the direct election of senators, which would become a reality with the 17th Amendment. And then another political reform also would be giving women the right to vote. So suffragists like Alice Paul fought for women's suffrage, leading to the eventual passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920.
But progressive movement was that You were saying I was talking too loud. Was that the right volume?
I'm just saying it's just a shame when people are listening in their cars or on their phones with their headphones and they have to adjust the volume so much because you start to scream.
Look, we can see the bars. Look at that right there.
You're wasting time.
Okay. But the progressive movement wasn't always inclusive. Many of these movements ignored racial injustice. Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois offered contrasting approaches to black advancement during this era. It's important to remember that Booker T. Washington very much believed in the black community sort of bringing themselves up, forming their own communities, their own industries, and working to better their own lives, whereas W. Du Bois believed that the talented tenth of the black community could integrate into white society and force America to recognize them.
So, the key about the progressive era, as we wrap this up, this is using the government to fix the problems of society. This is a big change from the laissez faire tactics of the Gilded Age. So, at the turn of the century, you have politicians like Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, Woodrow Wilson, but also people at the state level and individual reformers like Jane Addams, all contributing to this change, using change for social good.
At the turn of this century, the U.S. began looking outward. The idea of American exceptionalism, access to overseas markets, and belief in white superiority all helped justify imperialism. It is not necessary to own people to trade with them, says William Jennings Bryan. He was a big anti-imperialist right around the turn of the 20th century.
You know what William Jennings Bryan also was? A big failure.
Everything in life. No, actually, okay, yeah, he was never elected president.
Yeah, and he ran. You know what? He was the nominee for two political parties in the election of 1896, and he still lost.
He won the Scopes monkey trial.
He did.
He did.
So he didn't lose everything.
That's true. So really the United States is going to enter into this imperialism game that Europeans had been playing for quite some time. It really starts in 1898 with the U.S. declaration of war on Spain. And of course, this will be known as the Spanish-American War. And this was all about the way that the Spanish were treating the people of Cuba. Cuba had been a territory or a colony of the Spanish. And so the United States stepped in for a number of reasons and defeated the Spanish in a very short amount of time. Sometimes it's called the Splendid Little War. And because of that, the United States is going to emerge as a colonial power, gaining Puerto Rico as a territory, Guam as a territory, and also, even though we will pay for the Philippines from the Spanish, we acquire that as well. And this is really going to spark a debate over imperialism. You have those who want to see the flag of the United States go to other places. Those are imperialists. But then you have a lot of people who are very against this for moral reasons and for democratic reasons. If we're supposed to be this nation who is protecting others and is advancing liberty and fighting to make the world safe for democracy, holding other nations against their will is not very democratic. So you get the rise of anti-imperialists through people like Mark Twain.
Yeah, Mark Twain. Samuel Clemens' nom de plume is Mark Twain.
Where have I heard that before?
There's no time for me to explain the origins. But the U.S. would continue to assert...
Hold on. No, period.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone. The U.S. Would continue to look for ways to expand when it asserted its power with the open door policy in China and the Roosevelt corollary, which is, of course, building on the earlier Monroe Doctrine, claiming the right to intervene in Latin America. So in both cases, we have the United States looking somewhat aggressively to expand our global interests, which would make us more likely to engage in global trade and control our economic future.
Continuity. Monroe Doctrine of the 1820s, that the hemisphere is closed to European colonialism. Roosevelt corollary, turn of the century in the early 1900s. Not only is it closed, but the United States will also use military intervention to keep anybody else out.
That is a great connection. And as with any question that you get on the APUSH exam, about foreign policy. You can see anything and everything that we do through the lens of those three components. Either we do what we do outwardly because of national security, economics, or ideology. And that does not matter whether it's the Spanish-American War or any foreign policy situation. That's how you need to square that up. So initially, the U.S. stayed neutral during World War I, but several events pushed it into the conflict in 1917. One, unrestricted German submarine warfare. Two, the Zimmermann telegram. And three, U.S. economic ties to its allies.
And the U.S. entry into the war really shifts the tide. Chronology
matters.
So World War I begins in 1914. The United States will enter in 1917 after those three things that Mr. Hill just mentioned. And so at home, you have this huge mobilization for war through things like the War Industries Board. You have a new committee on public information in order to motivate people to contribute to the war effort, because this will be a total war. And you also have efforts to limit popular opinion and free speech during the war to protect the government's interest and their ability to wage this war in the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which is, all of these things are going to reshape the economy and society due to, the restriction of civil liberties.
The world must be made safe for democracy. That's Woodrow Wilson in 1917.
Yeah. Good Wilson there, by the way.
Yeah, I have no idea.
You sound like a Princeton man.
Okay, all right.
So the war ends, and we get the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the infamous Treaty of Versailles, and infamous for many reasons, but one of them being that the United States never actually ratifies it. Wilson's 14 points of peace was pretty much largely rejected, and the League of Nations never included the United States because Wilson was never able to really gather enough support at home to sign this treaty, and this will have a lasting impact.
And I think another takeaway, right, change in continuity, that today the United States is very Wilsonian. The idea of the United States constantly being involved in global affairs and being sort of the peacekeeper and the peacemaker, although it's not achieved under Wilson's presidency because we don't join the League of Nations, ultimately that legacy is really going to live on. And, the way that we participate in the world today, we are, one of the superpowers of the world.
And thinking about continuity and change, we in some ways learn our lesson from World War I, and after World War II, we lead the effort to create a global peace, the United Nations. And a lot of times you'll get questions on the test asking you to recognize that shift occurs, kind of building on what Ms. Keltner just illustrated there for you.
I'm surprised you knew how to say Versailles. I'm surprised you didn't say Versailles.
I think in Missouri, we do pronounce it Versailles. And I think it sounds, to my ear, a little better.
Well, not so much. But,
now, Mr. Hill, he is a cultured man. He's a man of the world.
Yes, of course. I'm as cultured as cottage cheese.
Here's your big picture review. Major themes. We've got industrial growth fueled by social inequality and reform, industrial capitalism. That's a big one. Progressives will respond to this by reshaping politics in ways that are both an attempt to improve the ills of industrial capitalism, but not always equitably. U.S. foreign policy will shift markedly toward imperialism. And then in World War I, we see a large expansion of government power, and the United States will begin to set the stage for global leadership.
Some of the exam questions you might see about these topics would be evaluating, the causes of the progressive reform or evaluating the successes of progressive reforms. You could also see questions that ask you to compare the imperialists versus the anti-imperialists, or also, evaluating the causes of imperialism. As Mr. Hill mentioned earlier, it's always related to national security, economics, and spreading our ideology. And then finally, analyzing the causes and effects of World War I involvement for the United States, especially the effects. APUSH doesn't care so much about the actual wars, but about the effect that those wars have on the home front, and also, on the home front following a war.
And if you're looking to boost your written responses with outside information, remember to use precise nouns. Use the named events, the laws, the people. Roosevelt, Wilson, Jane Addams, William Jennings Bryan, Du Bois, and always link them to the CED themes.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to APUSH for All. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple iTunes, or YouTube. We've got a couple more review episodes coming out, so keep an eye out for those. Feel free to send us any questions, a message on Instagram at APUSH for All.
Happy studying. Until next time, keep learning from yesterday to make sense of today.